Hello, my name is Jeremy Wishart. I'm the Director of Technical Communications at the Propane Educational Research Council. I'd like to welcome you today to our panel discussion. We're glad you can be here with us, albeit virtually. The Propane Education and Research Council is a national nonprofit organization that provides safety, training, and technology development programs on behalf of the entire propane industry in markets where the alternative energy is used, including agriculture. Today, I'll be playing the role of panel moderator for our discussion, but first things first, I would like to introduce our two guests. Each bring a unique perspective to energy use in the agriculture market and have many years in the ag markets nationwide. Mike Newland is the Business Development Director of the Agriculture Markets for the Propane Council, where he oversees programs, campaigns, and technology development for propane in all the ag market spaces nationwide. I'm also excited to have with us Alex Adams, who is a California-based almond grower. Thank you both for joining us today. We look forward to the discussion. We're here to talk with everyone today about the evolution of energy in the agriculture markets and how propane is going to play a vital role today and in the future going forward. Mike, let me start with you first. Can you relay to our viewers how propane is used in farming operations around the world and nationally today?
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks a lot. Appreciate you doing this, moderating, and thanks to Alex for joining us. And appreciate everybody tuning in. Everybody obviously would rather be in person in California, but we're going to make the best of this situation. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next year in 2022 for the in-person show. So I guess I want to start by talking a little bit about how propane is currently used around the farm. I think there's some regional differences that I'll point out to you. Depending on where you're watching, this will be very common knowledge and other parts may not. So the biggest thing throughout the Midwest, I guess, is everybody starts and stops when you think about propane use at grain drying. So grain drying is a big use for propane. As you get into some regional markets, though, we do some other crops as well. So we do a lot of crop drying around the country. Other things that I think have a more national use would be irrigation engines, generators, water heating systems for the farm as well, building heat systems. When we talk about building heat systems, we start thinking about greenhouse heat. We start thinking about livestock building. So that can be any of those. When we start thinking organics, we start talking about flame weed control systems. We use propane to disrupt the growth and cell development in weeds. And we can control weeds with tools in that regard. And then we do some other things with heat. We have a category called agronomic heat treatment systems that also plays into that organic space. So we've got a number of things we're doing. There's some number of things that are going on in California specifically that I think will be interesting on the organic space, and we'll touch on those a little later in the program.
So Mike, as I was listening to you, kind of one word came to mind, and that's versatility. Do you think that versatility of propane is part of the reason that so many producers and growers rely on propane to get work done, or are there other reasons or other benefits that they're relying on and utilizing and going forward with?
Yeah, I think I look at it as three different reasons I think that people use propane. Reliability is definitely one of them. We're going to touch on that one. But I think the first thing that I think of is a big deal is the ability of propane to be used around the farm without containment. And when I talk containment, I'm talking about fuel containment. And why is that? It's because it's safe. We don't have to worry about containing it. I mean, it's a non-toxic fuel. And I think that lends itself to use in a lot of places, especially as you look at livestock farms. It's healthier for people and it's healthier for the livestock. So I think that's a big deal. We meet EPA emissions without after treatment systems. So I think that's a big deal. Everybody's talking about tier 4 systems, and now we're looking at tier 5 down the road. So systems are becoming more complex. And I think propane allows you to meet air quality regulations without those after treatment systems. So I think that's a really, really key reason as to why we're seeing the growth in irrigation and things of that nature. I guess when you boil it down, farmers get to spend less time worrying about emissions and regulations and more time about just operating the farm and making sure that they're being profitable and doing everything on the farm that they can. So the second category that I take a look at, I think, is cost savings. I mentioned the after treatment systems that are on those engines. That reduces costs. So when you start comparing engines for irrigation, with different fuel types, you will typically see about a third less money spent on a propane engine than you would a comparable diesel engine for the same horsepower. When you start pulling those systems off, it does reduce the cost. So I think that's a big deal. Then we start talking about reliability and resiliency. I've not yet met a farmer that doesn't like to control their own destiny. And I think that's some of the things that we're seeing in some markets that folks are struggling with, and some things specifically, we start talking about peak pricing for electricity. So if you're running electric irrigation, gosh, you have some real challenges on trying to figure out when you can irrigate, how much it's going to cost you to irrigate, and how to address that. So that's a big deal. Power outages, are becoming a bigger and bigger issue in some parts of the country. That's something that folks in California have dealt with and are going to continue to deal with. So I think that's a challenge. And as you look to solutions for that, I think propane and power from propane generators can really provide an awesome alternative to what you're dealing with. And I think it really gets back to farmers getting to run their farm how they want to on the schedule that they want to, not being dictated by regulations or peak pricing as to how they really have to from an economic standpoint. So I think those are some key reasons.
Excellent. And even sounds like there's some level of independence as a selling factor there as well.
It really does. I mean, folks get a control. We've run an ad here, 365. You get to control your destiny 365 days a year. And I think that's a really key point as to why folks may want to look at alternatives.
So Alex, as a producer, and let me bring you in here for a second, as a producer and almond farmer, are you experiencing and seeing the same things from a propane perspective in your unique setting as that producer that Mike's mentioned? And can you kind of give us some background on yourself and tell us a little bit about your operation, how you're using propane, and how you ultimately came to that decision to use propane on your farm?
Sure. We started using propane on a test program back in 2015, I believe. And we put it on a deep well turbine, ran it for about 6 months. I was so impressed with it that we switched our operations over with between 3 different ranches and added 5 more power units that essentially drove everything. We got rid of the power companies. We got rid of PG&E. We got rid of peak, off peak. Any of the issues that, especially in California, that people are facing right now. They can't, the wind blows a little bit, the power goes off. I've gone from just an irrigation standpoint to all of my residences and vacation homes all have backup power tied in, and it's all propane driven. From the aspect of, like Mike was talking about with the fuel containment, you don't have to contain it. You don't have the theft issue with it that you do with diesel fuel disappearing or getting dumped or something like that. It doesn't go bad like diesel does. It doesn't grow bacteria. So it's been a very, very phenomenal experience for me. The cost savings alone on the power side of it was tremendous. I have one place that we were at the time 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Propane can beat that. You go into PG&E structure where it's 30 cents a kilowatt hour now. You go into peak, you jump to 40 plus in places. So propane has its place. Propane works. As I said, it's been a phenomenal experience for me. Between 5 different power units, the gen sets and everything else, the only thing I've ever lost was an alternator, and that was because a battery failed. Nothing to do with the engines or anything like that.
I think it's interesting, Alex, to hear your take on it, because living in the Midwest, like Mike, I have a vision of the ag world being grain drying, various other propane uses. So almond farms are not kind of in my daily repertoire. So you mentioned 3 ranches. About how many acres, how many, I guess, almond trees, what's your yearly yield? Just to kind of give everybody some context.
Between the 3 different ranches, it's 120 acres. If we took a yearly average, we have different varieties of nuts, so your production is going to be different depending upon what variety it is. But if I put it all together, an average, you're running about 3,800 pounds to the acre. The other thing that it gave me the ability to do was, if you have an electric irrigation system, irregardless of whether you're flooding, you're doing drip, you're doing micro sprinklers. I run drip and micro. The propane and the engine systems give you the ability to have an infinitely variable drive system. So you can speed up that water, you can slow that water down, you can isolate it into blocks if you need to, where you have different soil textures where the ground changes and you need to apply more water in one area and turn it off or apply less to another. It gives you a very, very flexible system that you're not going to get without a massive investment in some type of valving or some kind of an automated system that is going to, manage that side of it for you.
That's awesome. I'm personally learning things, so I love this discussion. Kind of moving on a bit, and Mike, I'll start with you on this, but as a country, we're certainly at a pivot point. Alex has certainly been living with this in California, but the new now the new in place administration that's taken leadership in Washington, D.C. has energy and emissions reductions and carbon free as part of their drive that they're going to basically force down our throats. We're starting to hear phrases like electrify everything in virtually all markets. We've seen it in the transportation sector, but we're hearing it everywhere now. We're hearing zero emissions. We're hearing net zero. We're hearing zero net carbon requirements. Certainly that's taken a lot of farmers that aren't used to hearing those terms and started to drive some paranoia, certainly some behavioral issues, and they're starting to look at all of their energy choices and what's out there, what's fact, what's fiction, everything. As the country adopts these new legislations and regulations around energy sources and alternative energies, can you tell us a little bit about how you see propane falling into the energy decisions and those choices being made across the country and where we stand right now?
Yeah, that's a lot in that question. And I think Alex is probably, and everybody else in California has kind of been living this for a few years, depending on where you're at. If you're in the Midwest, this is maybe a new conversation for you, or things that you need to be paying attention to that we have had the luxury of not really being involved in. So, I think it's a different conversation depending on where you're at in the country. But I think the reality is all electric. I don't see it working in agriculture. I could be wrong, or it's going to take us, 50 plus years to get there. We've got a lot of big equipment that pulls a lot of heavy things on steady duty type cycles, power cycles. And, that's a challenge. I think there's some opportunities though. But I guess I do want to point out that I don't think we can rely on all electric for the farm and think we can pull that off in 10 years. You asked about where propane fits. I guess the message today, as I start to maybe answer the question, is I think the thing to keep in mind is propane is clean today. We meet the regulations and the requirements today. We don't have peak pricing concerns. I mentioned earlier, we give folks the ability back to control their own farm and their own acres, which I think is awesome. And we've even done studies across the grid, the electric grid, looking at how much emissions are put off by producing that electricity that folks allege is clean, how much emissions are put off, and comparing our propane emissions to that grid power. And we win that conversation and comparison. Not every state, but significantly more than 80% of the states, our power is cleaner than the grid power. And I think that would shock a lot of people to know that. I think electric gets the pass that if you plug your device into the wall or you pull it off the power at the shop, that it's just given a pass that it's clean. Well, it may be clean compared to other fuels, but there are alternatives out there today, and they're better than that. So I think propane has a place. We've got to continue to educate folks, and I think that's what we're trying to do today: is educate the potential users that there are alternatives out there. They are effective, they're cost effective, and they're reliable. And I think that's the message that we need to continue to get out to the ag community. The regulation part of it is one thing, and we do what we can there. We've got other folks working on the regulators a little bit and having those conversations as to why we should be included in any policy going forward. So we're excited about it. We think we've got a great story. We think we have an opportunity if we're able to tell that story. And we think the best way to do that is continue talking directly with our end users. And that's what we're trying to do.
So kind of continuing on that theme, all farmers, all producers can benefit from cleaner energy and reduced emissions. I think we can all agree on that, especially as kind of pending regulations become increasingly more stringent. Mike, you had mentioned a few technologies beforehand. Are there some specific pieces of equipment kind of that are in the marketplace right now, or maybe around the corner, that you can talk about with current farms, organic farms, kind of those applications?
Yeah, you bet. And I think that's a great point, because everything we've talked about to this point has benefited the farmer or the rancher, which is awesome. But I think we've also got a great story when you start looking at it from a consumer standpoint. I guess the one thing I think people would find interesting is back in 1990, the Clean Air Act of 1990, propane was made an approved alternative fuel. And I think most consumers would not know that. I think that's a very important part, that the government had trusted us all the way back into the early 90s, and because they know our emissions profiles and know that we are clean. So specifically to your question, talking about some equipment that I think the average consumer would love to know about. So when you start looking at organic farms and weed control, we have flame weeding systems. And what that does, it takes an open flame made from propane. So we're burning propane in an open flame, and we're introducing that flame and heat to the weeds. And essentially it will kill or disrupt the way that the weed grows, and ultimately kills that weed without using pesticides. So I think that's a huge win for our organic farmers that are employing that technology. So I think that's a big win. I talked earlier about agronomic heat treating. We're burning propane, creating heat, blowing it into vineyards and into vegetable canopies to disrupt the life cycles of bugs and molds and mildews and the way that they reproduce, to create a healthier wine, grape or table grape, and also some vegetable crops. So I think that's a big win, and I think consumers can appreciate that. I think one of the coolest things is being done at UC Davis. We've been involved with Dr. Fenimore at UC Davis for a number of years. And Dr. Fenimore is working on soil steaming. We've been producing the power for most of those tests by burning propane, and they're injecting steam into strawberry fields. That's disrupting the life cycles of nematodes and weed seeds and things of that nature to get away from using soil fumigants. That is heavily regulated, and quite honestly should be heavily regulated, so we can produce a better strawberry or a cleaner start for a strawberry plant. So we've got some really cool technologies all benefiting from propane and its clean and renewable resources. So I think that's a great story for the consumer.
So Alex, let me bring you back into the discussion here, because you have kind of a unique position in all of this. You've heard what Mike said and how we've kind of formulated this conversation to this point. What do you feel the top priorities for producers such as yourself, is going forward when you're considering the fuel source, the energy source, what makes the most sense for your operation? What are the important factors in choosing that fuel source that you have to know, that you need to be able to understand and kind of spell out for everyone in your supply chain?
The simplest answer to that, in farming and in any business really, is, what is the bottom line cost going to be? Propane, what I've done is I've got enough storage capacity where, I'll buy it all in the summertime when it's cheap. Nobody's using it for heating or anything like that. The wintertime, everybody is pretty much shut down. You're not using any water or anything like that. That's not your growing season. So you're good in that respect. The one of the biggest places that propane has shined as far as the power grid in California and the future of California's power, which is anybody's guess at this point, but is trying to run your irrigation and coordinate it with the irrigation district water, or if you're pumping it out of the ground and you're running deep well turbines, you have to try and coordinate it with the time that the power companies are running in their off peak or their peak, and they continue to change that window. PG&E, I believe, now is going to different tiers in pricing, and then they're doing it also in different peak times of the day. So it used to be from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. was your off-peak time. Now, I had a ranch that we pumped the water out of the ground. It was flood irrigated, and I could get it in 12 hours on the checks, 75 to 85% of the way down the check, and then I'd have to shut the water down because my power bill is going to double or triple. And so you either never got water all the way to the end, or you started it all over again. And the propane and going that route gave me the ability to run anytime I want. The power goes out. I've had people call me, "Hey, our power's out. How are you still running your sprinklers?" Well, my power source didn't drop off the grid. It's it's doing its thing, and everything runs along. So there's a lot of positive benefits to doing it. Not only is it basically water vapor once it's burned, you don't have any of the other issues that you have to deal with the state, with the power, with as I said, we have a situation where if we get up to a 15-mile-an-hour breeze, they start shutting the power off. I look at other places and other states, and they don't seem to have those issues. Are they coming with all the electrification of the vehicles and everything else? Probably. But in California, the more of that they do, the worse the grid's going to continue to get, because it can't support what they're already trying to drive off of it.
I certainly think it's fair to say that the nation's grid, electrical grid, is not ready for all of the push to electrify everything that everyone wants. There's certainly going to be winners and losers, whether that's by market or by social structure, that have to it has to become a weighing exercise, who gives up what, when, how, why, those kind of things. And it's certainly a larger discussion, but I think we've touched on a lot of really unique issues that you see in California that Mike is starting to see nationwide. And I think everybody's going to feel before we're ready for it. Shifting gears a little bit here, Mike, I'll turn back to you because I know from a PERC perspective, we've got a lot of tools and resources and data that are available for farmers. And we've talked a lot at length here about the equipment and emissions benefits and cost benefits, but what's out there that a farmer can turn to and where do they turn to get it?
Yeah, appreciate you leading me right into where I wanted to go. So thank you very much. I'd encourage everybody that wants to learn more about propane, go to propane.com. All the technologies that we talked about today, from irrigation to grain drying, on and on and on and on, are all highlighted on propane.com. So you can go there to find out information in general on the technology, but also any technology providers. So the OEM companies that can bring you that technology are all listed at the bottom of each and every one of those pages. So great information there. Go to propane.com. Something I haven't talked about today is our propane farm incentive program. If you're looking to convert from another fuel to propane, or maybe you're putting up a brand new greenhouse, I would encourage you to go to propane.com/farm incentive. We have farm incentives, a little bit of money for some information back from you and your experiences with our fuel. So all the details are spelled out there and what equipment is available and eligible for an incentive at propane.com/farm incentive. And then if you're interested in checking out testimonials from users, such as what Alex has been able to share with us today, from other segments as well. We have customer testimonials there. We have case studies, articles, all kinds of good information for you at propane.com. And I guess I mentioned it earlier, but I definitely want to mention it again. I am so looking forward to coming back to the farm show in person in 2022. You have no idea. So we are trying to do virtual, trying to bring you useful content, but appreciate it. But there's nothing like being in person. So we're looking forward to February of 2022. If you've got any questions for me directly, I would love to hear from you. A couple platforms you can find me on are LinkedIn or on Twitter. Search and find me by looking for @Ag Mike Newland. That's the best way to find me on both platforms. Appreciate your interest today. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support in World Ag Expo. Sorry we can't be there. But I would definitely want to thank Alex as we're kind of winding down here too, Jeremy. So thanks again for hosting us.
Excellent. Let me say thanks to both you and Alex as well for your time today, your thoughts, your insights into the future of energy in the agriculture markets. As Mike said, we're all hopeful that we can get together again next year at World Ag Expo. It'll be my first time, so I'd like to see it in person rather than virtually. But certainly thank you to everyone for viewing today. Thank you for your time. In the meantime, as Mike said, keep an eye on all things propane at propane.com. Again, thank you and stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.